I've got big news. I've said this so many times and I'm gonna say it again just because it is so shocking. The Philippines has one of the longest coastal areas in the world, and we import 93% of our salt consumption. It's crazy. If you've been watching Feature for a while now, you'll realize that we've done a lot of documentaries about salt. Long story short, a law was passed decades ago in the Philippines that basically made it illegal to sell salt that hasn't been iodized. So basically, any non-iodized salt was being sold illegally by our salt artisans. And salt is something that you don't necessarily think about that much, but it is the cornerstone of any cooking all around the world. That's why in Australia, US, and France, you have specialty salts that are being sold really expensively. And in the Philippines, we have those specialty salts. It's just you couldn't buy it, and the people who were selling it were getting discouraged. So this is the big news I was telling you about, and I'm going to read off of this if you will indulge me. Republic Act number 11985, also known as the Philippine Salt Industry Development Act, mandates the designation of public lands as salt production areas in a bid to increase salt production in the country. It is also no longer illegal to sell uniodized salt in the Philippines. I'll read you something that to me is music to my ears. Iodization of artisanal and non-food grade salt and salt intended for export is hereby rendered optional in the country. So it does not stop here. Yes, the law has passed. It's finally been signed. There's going to be a salt council that needs to be put together where they can kind of map all these salts and help these salt farmers develop their products and get them to export. So that's why I kind of wanted to put together all the documentaries that we've shot over the years to show you how special these salts are, and for you now to be able to legally buy these salts from the salt farmers. All of their contact details are in the description below. You can buy all of their salts by texting them, or now it's available on Lazada and different places. I'll put all the links. Just please support your local salt farmers and enjoy this really long now documentary about salt in the Philippines.
Salt is the unassuming hero in every kitchen. The Philippines, being an archipelago, has a variety of heirloom salts, yet they're being forgotten. This is the Pasuquin sand salt and Tultul of Ilocos Norte. Rachel Fariñas learned how to make Pasuquin salt when she was just 7 years old. It has been her source of livelihood for the last 20 years. It's around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, under the scorching heat of the sun. Rachel starts to gather some sand, a step that they called pagkudkud. Rachel transfers the sand to a woven basket called bakar. She repeats the process until the bakar is filled to the brim. Rachel pours some seawater in the sand-filled bakar. Just below it, a small container catches the seawater filtered by the sand. This is the concentrated liquid which will eventually be cooked and be reduced to salt, or what they already call katas ng asin. Rachel shows us the patapao. It's a rock which, she says, comes from a honeybee in the mountains. Patapao is a tool that they use in determining the salinity of the seawater, or katas ng asin, that they have filtered. If it floats, there's a high chance they're going to be making a lot of salt from it. If it sinks, the water collected isn't saline enough to produce salt. The patapao has been passed down through generations by her ancestors.
Ngayon, tinatanggol ko na yung buhangin, wala nang katas ito. Tapos lalagyan ko na naman siya ng panibagong buhangin. Teko ka dito, Jabalay. Tulok ko Kaya lang.
Rachel prepares the firewood, or the panggatong. She puts enough firewood to ensure it would produce a powerful but consistent fire. She pours in the filtered salt water. The constant heat dictates the amount of salt she would be able to produce. The less fire, the less salt that there is. Rachel skims the remaining impurities from the salt water to make sure it comes out clean and white. She leaves the salt water to boil, guarding the fire, for 3 additional hours. After 3 hours, the salt is reduced from the filtered seawater. Rachel scoops the salt, places it in a basket to further dry it out.
"20 years na po akong gumagawa ng pasukin asin. Natutunan ko tong paggawa ng asin sa mga magulang ko. Mula nung bata pa ako, sumasama na kami sa kanila sa punta sa dagat. Tapos lumalaki na kami na ang sumunod na generasyon na pumalit sa kanila. 2 ang asin ang nagagawa namin. Yung asin, tapos yung tudtud.
The drained water from this process, over a couple of salt processing cycles, about 3 months, piles into a stalagmite-like mound of salt called tudtud. The water drops, dries, and forms in the sun, and is usually ready when it's the size of an adult leg. The 3-month process gives them 2 to 3 kilos of tudtud, which they usually sell for about 1,200 pesos, or around $20 US. After this process, Rachel and other salt makers grilled the solidified salt to further bring out its flavor, even sometimes adding sukang Ilocos to make it softer and more palatable. When times are hard, this salt is often consumed with rice for sustenance.
Gagawa ako ng asin hanggat kaya ko pang maggumawa ng asin kahit matanda na ako. Kasi yun na lang ang namin dito, tradisyon namin eh. Kung hindi kami gagawa sa tradisyon namin, wala nang gumagawang iba kasi yung mga bata ngayon, puro gadget. Baka sa susunod na wala nang na paggawa ng asin dito.
Singin, sige ta ka na masama.
Umay kayo, tag susuka tayo timangga. Isaw-saw tayo nalutong nga tudtud.
Ni imas dayto. Timangga na isaw-saw iti na idenlat iti na tuno nga tudtud na imas dayto. Ni imas. Mangan tayo.
Mangan tayo.
Being an archipelago, the Philippines has more than 36,000 kilometers of shoreline, the 5th longest in the world. With large bodies of seawater come the abundance of salt. We used to have a thriving salt industry. Today, salt making in the country is a dying tradition, an ironic and sad reality. This is our love letter to the beautiful Irasans or salt beds of the past, and the few ones that remain today. Those postcard-worthy scenes of gallant salt makers, water birds eclipsing the sky, their skins glistening with sweat as they toil under the incessant heat, a view that is vanishing along with the precious salt that these artisans make. This is the heirloom Irasan of Kawit, Cavite. In the early 90s, salt harvesting was a well-rewarded practice. There were 5 major salt producers in the country: Pangasinan, Bulacan, Occidental Mindoro, and Cavite. The Philippines was self-sufficient in salt, but with import liberalization, years of urbanization, and the subsequent Asin law passed in 95, disallowing uniodized salt to be sold, salt farms began to dwindle in number. In Kawit, Cavite, we met one of the 2 remaining Mang-iiras families or salt makers. Among them was 55-year-old Nerly, who learned to harvest salt as a young boy in the 80s.
Ako nga pala si Nerly Kahalili ng San Juan Dos, Tabeleta, Cavite. Bata pa ako nung ako yung unang humawak ng pwesto dyan sa Asinan. Umiyak ako dahil bata pa nga ako noon. Dahil puro matatanda kasama ko noong panahon na yun. Siyempre, lahat ng mabibigat napapasan ko. Dahil siyempre mga matatanda, hindi mo pwedeng basta utusan niya. Ikaw lang utusan. Diba? Ikaw naman, sulod ka. Baka magagawa Bata ka, bagong salya ka pa.
Due to the shortage of workers, some salt makers like Tatay Nerly have to tend to the salt beds in their land on their own. The process is long, tedious, and labor-intensive. The harvest season happens strictly during the dry season when the sun is at its peak, but the preparation of the salt beds begins way before that. From December until the beginning of summer around March, salt makers clean the salt beds, shallow artificial basins meant to extract salt from seawater through natural evaporation. Once done, they pile mounds of mud on the banigan to establish a flat base for the salt. When the soil dries up, they sweep the dust off the salt beds, add more water, let them dry, and clean it tediously until it's ready to be used for the salt making season. It's important to accomplish the whole process in a timely manner before the monsoon season takes over and puts their hard work to waste. In the next part of the process, the salt makers transfer salt water from a jiggered dam to their depository and fill the gaps in the salt beds with rocks. This is how they store seawater to ensure that it absorbs the level of salinity needed to produce the salt. This step takes as much as 2 months. Soon after, more seawater is transferred through pipes from one depository to another. The salt makers utilize different basins to store water in different stages of salinity to heighten the richness of the salt. This is carried out simultaneously as they clean the salt beds. Nerli explains the different depositories and how they use them to maximize the salinity level of the salt water. The initial water collected goes into the deposito and is then transferred to Primera, when its salinity level reaches 5. From Primera, they transfer it to Segunda and let it sit for 2 weeks to a month. At this point, the water salinity level reaches about 6 to 7. After this, the water is moved to the next depository, Tercera, then finally to Ultimo, the saltiest of the bunch with a salinity level of about 8 to 10. Each depository is also cleaned before any water is transferred, one depository at a time and not all at once. At every stage, the salinity level is measured with a tool, or for veteran salt makers like Nerli, they can tell by the taste. Once the water reaches its target salinity inside the ultimo, it's ready to be transferred to the banigan. One of the most crucial parts of this process is drying the salt water. It takes days or even weeks. After it solidifies, the salt is ready to be harvested. The sequence at which the salt is harvested affects the color of the salt and its uses. The first harvest, more grayish in color, is used for preserving fish, making salted eggs, curing carabao meat, or in the Filipino shrimp paste called bagoong. In France, this gray salt is also known as sel gris. It's actually quite prized in kitchens all over the world, saying that it contains more flavor and minerals. The next harvest, which yields cleaner and whiter salt, is sold to bakeries or in the local market, while the best ones may be eaten as is. For about 8 months of hard work, the salt makers earn 200 to 300 pesos for every sack of salt. It was in May when our team first visited the salt makers, but despite being in the middle of summer, they were plagued with rain. It was clear as day. They are on the front lines of climate change.
18 taon na akong nag-asin. Parang hindi katulad ng dati na inaalin namin sa asin maganda. Nagbago nung pumasok tong 2000. Hindi na katulad ng dati mainit, laging mainit. Ngayon meron yung Abril, ulan. Siyempre yung mga taong dating nag-iiras na nawawala na ng gana. Kasi hirap na hirap ka, pagkatapos hindi ka kikita. Pag mula, patay ka Zero balance ka na naman doon. Maghihintay ka na naman ilang linggo, isang buwan. Bagong hirap. Tamo pag inulan yan, nilinisin mo na naman yan, isa-isa. Para kami suntok sa buwan na andap-andap na ang panahon para bang pakipagsapalaran.
Another salt maker explained how this affects the quality of their salt.
Kaya ang asin natin gumaganda dahil sa amihan. Pag ang hangin nagbago, nagsabalas, nagkabagat, ang asin natin mapangit na gumagaspang pa. Kaya katulad niyan, papangit ng ulan, di ba? Kasi ang hangin paikot-ikot. Hindi katulad ng permi amihan lang. Lahat talaga, talaga maputi talaga.
When July came, we returned for another visit in the hopes of seeing the full potential of a salt harvest in sunnier weather. Unfortunately, the weather still did not cooperate. Trying to save what they can, the artisans harvested some produce, albeit not as much as they expected.
which meant more loss than profit.
Tayo, yan, katulad yan, wala ibon, di ba? Maraming ibon na lipad na maputi. Pag ang pakpak daw ay nangitin ng mga katawan, paulan na yon. Paulan na.
Init, ulan. Hindi kami nakabuo ng isang buwan na na talagang harvest. Patlang din. Mga 500 lang inani naming asin na kaban. Noon, libo talaga eh. Ngayon wala. Talagang konti. Pag umulan ng malakas, lubog to. Minsan, wina-water pump namin. Pinakapunta namin dito yung tubig para matutuyo. Pag lagi-lagi na ulan, lugi na kami sa gasolina.
Nahihirapan kami. Kasi imbes na makakasuporta sa amin yung trabaho namin, nawawala rin.
Kaya ikaw, pakikipagsapala sa kung pumasok ka dyan, ianda mo na sarili mo. Alam mo na ang panahon, ganito-ganito eh. Alam mo, sabi mo, ganito-ganito. Hindi mo naman sabi, kalikasan yan eh. Yan ang nakatagdahara dyan eh. Magagawa ba tayo dyan?
Besides the challenges posed by unpredictable weather and the season caused by climate change, salt makers also reeled under the impact of the passage of the Asin Law in '95. The Act for Salt Iodization, or Asin, mandated that all salt sold in the country be iodized. While intended to combat the incidence of iodine deficiency among Filipinos, it doomed a thriving salt-making industry and the communities and families that depended on it. Without training and support to iodize their produce, the salt farmers were forced to leave their craft behind, as selling their salt technically became illegal.
Konti lang taga napasok na mag-iras. Kulang na sa trabador. Tapos nung nauso nga yung iodize, halos pinagbawal pa nga to. Kaya yung iba lalong hindi na nag-iras. Hinuhuli to nung nag-ano ng iodize. Kailangan iodize ang bilhin. Kaya humina lalo to.
Yung sa yung sa iodize, walang bumili ng asin namin. Kumbaga, parang binatas nila na hindi raw tong asin na to na panahon pa ng Hapon yata, hindi lang Hapon, Kastila pa may asin na. Huwag daw tangkilikin yung asin ganyan. Puno-puno asin namin dyan, walang bumili. Yun lang tinatrabaho dyan hindi naman kami, walang bayad dyan Kaya lang kami kikita pag meron ng asin. Ay, iyak ka, talagang iyak mo, dugot pawis yan. Pakipagsapala na lang. Tanggapin mo kung ano ibigay sa'yo, wala ka naman magagawa, di ba?
Dogged by threats of arrest, most salt farmers have given up on their livelihoods. In the next 2 decades, the Philippines turned more towards importing salts that were already iodized at a price lower than what was locally produced. While the Asin Law responded to the country's health problems, which up until today is quite unclear whether or not the majority of the population suffers from a lack of iodine in our diet, it also presented 2 fronts that needed more foresight: helping the local salt industry to produce iodized salt, and giving consumers the choice to buy the kind of salt that they want. Artisanal salts at the end of the day should be more expensive than table salt and will unlikely be used by the majority of our population. There is good news though. The amendment to the law carving out artisanal salts from the law and allowing them to be sold has recently passed in the lower house and will soon go to the Senate next. The bill seeks to address the challenge for small local farmers to compete with large salt producers, especially in the global market. It also wants to revive the practice of making salt with different processes unique to certain locations in the country, pushing further the ultimate goal of geographical indication for our local products and produce.
The question remains, can we still bring back the glory of Irasan, and are we willing to do what it takes to do so? We urge you to support your local salt producers in any way you can. Not only will they bring flavor to your table, but will spark much needed conversations about the state of our agricultural systems.
Mas masarap yung budbud na asin kasi dumadaan siya sa filtration process eh. At saka yung traditional na nilalagyan mo siya ng balunos at saka salangkugi is very unique.
Located in the province of Iloilo, Miagao is a coastal town with a salt-making tradition that dates back as early as 1823. In its glory days, the town produced up to 10,000 sacks of budbud, or salt, annually in the salt farms spread across the coastline of its 21 villages. Always, the heirloom tradition would be a sight to behold, a process that cannot be seen anywhere else in the world. Today, Miagao's salt-making tradition is on the verge of becoming a distant memory. Several hacenderos have turned their backs on it after shorelines have become more sparse because of climate change and the establishment of seawalls. The younger generation also lost interest in the art due to its laborious process. 195 years have since passed after Miagao began harvesting salt. Today, only one woman remains to take the helm in reviving the town's dying budbud sea salt industry.
Ako si Lorlie Noblezada, isang registered social worker, 47 years old, taga Miagao, Iloilo, na ngayon po ay isang asendera na kung saan po ay gumagawa ng budbud sea salt. Yung Miagao na Budbud Salt, ito ay nagsimula pa noong 1820s. Naririyan pa naman kami sa may barter pa rin kami hanggang ngayon. Halimbawa, ang lore, may mais kami at saging. Pwede bang magpalitan tayo ng asin? Okay. Halimbawa, yung salangkugi namin at balunos, ano lang yan, barter. Binibigyan nila kami ng balunos at salangkugi. So, ang kapalit niyan, asin. Yung asawa ko, yung talagang asindero at asindera sila noong unang panahon. Nasa isip niya pa rin kung paano yung paggawa ng asin, ganyan. Napakaganda kasi di ba noong 1820s pa yun, walang aklat pero na-preserve. Nare-revive mo pa rin yung kultura at tradisyon ng paggawa ng asin. Organize po kami ng mga elderly at saka mga loving mothers. So nagkaroon po ako ng proposal kay Chancellor Minda Formasyon na kung pwede makagamit po kami ng property ng UP. Noong 2018, pinatawag ako ng UP kay Ma'am Bebot Revelio na sinabihan niya ako na, Lord, nakita namin pala yung proposal mo. Ano, gusto mo pa bang gumawa ng asin? So, gingrab ko yung opportunity. Pinili ko yung pag-aasin kasi nakikita ko kung mag-aasin ka pala, ang tagal mong mamatay. Kasi wala kang sakit, di ba? Malusog ka pala dito kasi palagi kang nakalublob sa tubig dagat. Gusto kong ipakita na kailangan naming i-revive, i-preserve. Dapat bilang asindero-asindera, dapat mag-start sa iyo. Riyan ang passion mo na talagang gagawin mo po siya. Pero kung pera lang yung habol mo, hindi yan maglalast. Yung process ng paggawa namin ng asin na budbud na asin, una-una, kailangan for 2 to 3 months, kailangan talaga naming linisin ang buong area. Kukunin yung mga bato, yung mga dumi-dumi, lahat. At saka after that, magkaroon na kami ng fencing. Nilalagyan namin ng flaglets para malaman nila na itong lugar na ito is asinan. And then, ito yung buhangin talaga. Kailangan na diligan natin ng tubig dagat. And after that, after 1 week, so dinadala na natin itong isang row ng buhangin doon sa filtration house. Doon sa filtration house, doon ay hinugasan natin ng tubig dagat. So ngayon, dahil nag-innovate nga, so meron na siyang gripo doon na hugasan siya ng tubig dagat yung buhangin at saka ma-filter na siya. Doon na siya pupunta sa depository na tinatawag namin na kamaw. Doon na namin siya kinukuha at nilalagay sa mga blue drums. At saka sa blue drums, doon na namin kukunin naman at ilalagay doon sa may bamboo beds. And after a day or 2 days, nakadepende rin sa init ng araw at saka sa hangin. Nagmamatter rin pala yung hangin. Pag northern yung hangin, at saka mainit, ay talagang ang ganda. Pero pag ang init ng araw makulimlim at saka yung hangin is southern, so hindi siya talaga mag-solidify. So napakahalaga na very observant ka bilang asendera o asendero at saka malalaman mo kung may ma-harvest ba tayo ngayon o wala. Mula naman doon sa may bamboo beds o duyduyan, hindi mag-harvest na tayo. After harvest, whole night siyang ilalagay natin dyan sa may depository kasi basa pa yan. And then, after a day, nilalagay namin sa may drying facility na nasa net. Doon naman natin siya nilalagay for 1 day. And then, doon na tayo pupunta sa ating roasting house. Dati, wala kaming roasting house. Pero dahil sa training namin sa food safety, kailangan talaga na i-roasted yung asin to kill the impurities. And then, doon na tayo magpapackaging. Yung 500 grams is 100 pesos. Noong 2018, nung nagsimula kami, meron pa namang nagbubudbud dyan sa Barangay Gibungan. Kaso lang yung sa kanila kasi, nitong mga 2023 na, parang nagkaroon na sila ng dying na po talaga. Kasi yung lugar nila doon, may seawall. So wala na silang shoreline na paggawaan ng asin. Very significant role po kasi ang buhangin sa amin kasi ito yung masala o nagfi-filter ng tubig dagat. Tapos yung dyan sa mga sabayan sa Baybay Norte, Baybay Sur na dati rin nag-aasin, tumigil na rin po sila dahil na-shorten yung shoreline at saka yung seawall. Kasi dati magsabi kang summertime, tuloy-tuloy yung init. Pero ngayon hindi na siya grabe ang init sa umaga, pagkahapon uulan siya. So hindi mo talagang mahawakan na o makontrol na it's summertime, parang ganon. So yung sa akin, na-challenge ako na paano ba ako mag-innovate. Kung gusto kong i-revive ito at i-preserve, naririyan pa rin yung traditional na pamamaraan ng paggawa ng asin. Parang kumukonsult rin ako sa mga profesor ng University of the Philippines and the Visayas, sa DTI, sa DOST, sa Coastline 5023 kung ano ba yung pwede. At saka pinag-uusapan. Narinig ko ang balitang ganyan rin na nag-import pa tayo ng asin. Ang masasabi ko lang na yung ma-revive talaga yung gawaan ng asin Kahit na sa ibang lugar ng Pilipinas, halimbawa yung magtulungan, sana magtulungan yung mga asindera-asindero na naibalik talaga eh. At saka siguro yung focus ng government. Kasi kung minsan ang focus ng government, bakit mag-asin pa ba tayo kung pwede man lang tayo makabili sa ibang bansa? Siguro may, parang may mindset sila na ganun. Pero kung sa akin lang sana through LGU, magtulungan na makapunta ka sa ibang lugar, tulungan mo sila. Bilang registered social worker, ito na talaga yung buhay ko eh. Gusto ko talaga maging asendera kasi nandito yung passion ko. Yung lugar na asinan na ito nagbibigay sa amin ng avenue na rine-revive yung dying industry, maipasa ko sa next generation at saka magkaroon siya ng social impact. I'm proud talaga and it's a privilege na maging asendera.
Asin Tibuok is known for its sharp taste with smoky and fruity undertones and has been described as the purest and cleanest artisanal sea salt. But for something deceptively simple, it takes several months of preparation and requires meticulous care and vigilance, as it can only be made from March to December due to the sea salinity. This is why it finds itself on the brink of extinction, with only a few families having the patience and grit to continue bringing it to life. One of these is the Manungas family, one of the last asinderos of Alber, Bohol.
Ako si Nestor Manungas, taga Albuquerque, Bohol. Ako ang tigama sa Asin Tibuok. Ako na kuan ako kay sa akong amahan, mao ay may pagkamat ko na mao may akong imatngunan nga nagbuhat og asin. Gitrain ko sa akong amahan parang makamao ko wag asin. Mao nang asa siya, tuwa ko gay dala niya. Parang mahibaw ko sa trabaho sa pinubre nga trabaho. Asin. Hantod nadako ko. May trabaho gyapon.
This is one of the few surviving pre-colonial practices, when inland-bound rice farmers used to trade with asinderos in need of rice, each obtaining their staple for the year. Tatay Nestor's brother, Father Chris Manungas, shares more about the rich history of salt making in their family.
In my memory, when I was born, I was already born in that tradition, and I was told that even before my grandfather, my maternal grandfather, started the tradition or continued it, there was already that practice of that way of making salt, the Asin Tibuok process.
Wala gyud gi-experience sa mga amahan mahitungod sa tradisyon sa paggama sa asin. Ako lang yung baluan nga mao gyud niyang gitagaag pagtagad kay aron makahimo siya pagpakaon sa iyang pamilya. Diha gyud mi nakakaon nga wala may makabsi og gitawag og humay tungod sa kakugis sa mga amahan.
It's really tedious. It's just imagine to produce 100 units of Asin Tibuok. It takes us 3 months to do that.
Coconuts first have to be harvested, used, and then husked. After that, they're soaked for 3 months to act as a vessel for seawater. They are then chopped and dried out in the sun. At no point can these be rained on. If they do, they have to start from scratch, as this would reduce the overall salinity of the product. After 5 days, they are burnt and reduced into ash, or what they call gasang, which needs to be white. The gasang is then filtered into a funnel-shaped bamboo called the sagsag. This is lined with some leaves to act as a strainer. Seawater is continuously poured to leach out the salt or tasik from the ashes.
This step usually takes 3 days and nights with little to no sleep at all. After this, the tasik is poured into special clay pots, usually hundreds of them, all lined up in rows over a special furnace. These are left to simmer, continuously replenishing the evaporated liquid as they go, also making sure to tend to the fire and making sure that it stays at the right temperature the whole time. This goes on for a whole day and is repeated as more and more solid mass accumulates at the bottom of the pot until eventually it cracks, hence its nickname, dinosaur egg. All the clay pots are then finally put to rest to cool down before you're able to use them. The process is long and arduous, but is it all worth the time and effort for traditional salt makers like Tatay Nestor? Currently, Asin Tibuok only sells from 400 to 700 pesos in the market, a far cry from the common table salt that anyone can get for less than about 80 pesos. But if you compare its price point with its international counterparts, you will realize that it's actually in the same range, if not cheaper, than some of the most expensive salts in the world.
Okay, magsugod na ta sa atong nilugaw para pagkahuman ani ato ning timplahan sa asin tibuok. Atong gibutang ang white rice. Hinahinay ni siya atong sigaan hantod mahimong maabot sa nilugaw. Kani nga nilugaw, since gagmay pa mi, magyud din taon ni among kanon kay maghulat mi sa panahon sa ting-ani. Kaya among amahan, mao gini trabaho sa among amahan, mag-asin, unya malipay mi inig human sa asin kay isuroy sa bukid. Labay sa 2 ka buwan, balikon sa among amahan kay magkubra na sa bayad sa asin nga mao ang humay.
So when we were growing up, we were talking among ourselves, those who were involved in that, the family, the sons and daughters of Asin Tibuok making families. We were talking among ourselves and saying, we cannot just stay here with the same livelihood until we grow up, until we die, because then we will have no economic progress with that. The young generation, in our generation, we slowly lost interest in that.
After making the salt, they still had to go to the farmlands and mountains to trade their yield with the farmers. The cycle became way too much to bear, and so the siblings pursued different paths. The eldest, who was the last one to make the artisanal salt in their family, became a carpenter. Tatay Nestor became a plumber, while Father Chris went on to become a priest in Zamboanga. The salt-making tradition in the family came to a halt. Their salt-making hut was destroyed by the typhoon and forgotten in 1983. That was until the 90s, where Father Chris saw an opportunity.
In the 90s, towards the turn of the century, there were only just from 200 salt-making families, there were some like 2 or 3 families left, aging salt makers. At the turn of the century, there was only one left, and it can only produce like 50 to 80 pieces once a year. And then around 2010, there was no more production. Now nobody is interested anymore. And so I thought of, why not revive it and give it a new life using some kind of machineries to help ease the hard labor in the production.
Pagkakuha sa umanghod nga nagahuman na siya, upil sa nahaw nga nung atong balikon to paggamas asin kay wa na nanggamas asin ron. Di ko mo kuha kay peteng haguan ang trabaho Sa ayaw ka balaka kay tagaan ka rin pagkasadong nga trabaho. Parang di ka haguan. Kuhaan sa bunot, palitan ka sa kanan. Pagkuha sa kahoy, palitag sinso. Kung pag kanang na sa libong kita na yung kuhaan, palitag makina, parang hose na gamiton. Lahi gyud sa una kay manumano ikaram usa. Tabang ko sa una usahay nga kami duha sa akong amahan. Karon kani ana may itagaan mo kung ano gyud na ayong katabang. Mao tong na kuan pag ko na inganyo ko ba ako sige, balik ka.
So mao nang gusto niya nga i-restore kay gitawag na niya nga legacy para sa pamilya nga kining gibilin nga panginabuhi sa among amahan nga dili na mo makalimtan hantod sa among mga apo, hantod sa mga sungay.
He was able to convince his siblings to revive the family tradition of making salt, but it was just one of the many hurdles that they had to overcome.
Facing all the difficulties at the beginning, I have to make a loan. I have no money for all myself. I am a priest and I have no income. It took us almost 5 years to repay the loan with so many penalties. I just cannot live it. Because of my love for the tradition, my love for it. I always remember my father, my grandfather, all the people who have been working with it.
Tay, mga tana po tay. Unsa na to pagkahibalo tay nga maayo na siya nga abo.
Ikaw nga dugay na kang kuan, expert na magana kay bawo na magana nga pilay kining dao ba o pilay dadon pila ka kun dadon ane.
Thankfully, their sacrifices have been slowly paying off. The Asin Tibuok got global recognition as it got listed in the Slow Food Arc of Taste Catalog of Endangered Heritage Foods in 2016.
What makes me happy now is that people have noticed it. So many people, we never imagined that our Asin Tibuok will reach the United States and will reach Australia and will reach Europe. And it has. Because some people got interested, they bought it. And now, many other old asinderos, now they're getting interested again. And they're organizing so they can go back to doing it.
While there has been growing interest in the salt, the ultimate question remains: who will continue the tradition when all the aging asinderos are gone?
O sa amo lang nga pamilya, ug makita na mo nga sa among mga anak, wala gyud kauban namo sa production karon or sa pagmaneho sa Asin Tibuok sa among mga anak. Tungod kay naa na sila karon lain nga mga career.
Mao na yung kuan ang bitaw kay sige ko awhag nila ba nga pagtuon lagi mo ng kuan asin kay aw mo nga tun-an nga pagsugod kanang na mo taktik ani pag kuan para lang kuan ba madali ang pagtrabaho. Di man jud sila mo sugot, di man jud sila mo gana.
Unsa ka ay mahitabo kung si Enong Nestor tungod sa iyang pangindaron 72 years old magkahinay na iyang panglawas. Unya wala siya mga anak nga na-interest ani kay tuan na sila sa ilang kalalain nga panginabuhi. Ang dili taga Bohol gusto nilang dili gid mawala. Gani gitawagon ko sa usa ka client nato o customer sa nga, "Ma'am, ayaw ba yan ninyo ibaligya sa dayuhan ang inyong paghimo sa Asin Tibuok? Ayaw ba yan ninyo itugan?"
While nobody from the younger generations have expressed interest in continuing the family's salt-making legacy, hope is not entirely lost because there's still someone, albeit not someone from the family, who's willing to do so. And that person is Pong, Tatay Nestor's assistant, who has been helping him out since 2010.
Ang sinugdanan ani nagmuha sila terbante kay mo operate dapat sila balik silang asinan. Silingan nun mi sa anak ni nung Nestor adto, iya kong giignan di kuampod ko'y trabaho. Gisugot pag ko, suway ko trabaho. Mura mayong pangitaan pod kay mo ko'y lain trabaho. Sa among pagkuyog, murag nakasinati ko nga sa paghimog asin diha nakuha tanan yang mga iya kong tudloan, ansaon. Basta diha na ko nakuha mga teknik niya, yang itudlo sa ako, unsaon pag sa libo, ano magluto. Paningkamutan lang, mapirpik makuha tanan niyang diskarte. Pero sa pagkakaroon, marag dili pa kaayo nga makuha gyud.
A tedious and tiresome process, yes, but without a doubt, painstakingly beautiful. And yes, this Boholanon legacy is worth all the time, effort, and sacrifice. Whether the younger generation sees this and acts on it, no one can tell for sure. But our hope remains that from fire, water, and ash, this tradition will not lose its spark and instead burn brighter, before it's too late. There are many ways of harvesting local salt, and it varies from one province to another. In Zambales, they have Asin Tibuok, a traditionally harvested sea salt that comes in a buyo, a woven basket made from pawid or palm, bamboo, and rattan mixed together that's both sturdy and completely biodegradable. Today, Asin Tibuok is produced by the locals in the Panayunan community at the Sambali Beach Farm. But their story began over 120 years ago when Nicholas Camara acquired a piece of land for harvesting and trading rice.
Based on our family records, my great-grandfather, Nicolas Camara, purchased this property, which at that time was 21 hectares, in 1888. After he purchased it, he wanted to make it productive and figured the best way was like through a partnership with the local families.
At the turn of the century, the land would be used to gather salt. Through this partnership, Nicolas Camara divided the 1 hectare salt beds into 25 families in the area, with each family tending to 500 square meters. Under the Fair Trade Agreement, Camara received 25% of the profits, while the farmers got the rest of the 75%, and were allowed to sell their harvests in whichever way they saw fit.
Anak, Baliya maganda, ginawa ni tatay, kinalibutan, alal kawayan, tinam na masitas, tinam na gulay, nomahilima na ang tinahi tatay. Mga kasamahan ko po dito sa Panayunan, si Nanay Edith, tapos si Nanay Ilbe po, si Nanay Ilbe, tapos yung anak ko po si May. Kami po yung magkakasama po dito sa Panayunan.
Today, Nanay Editha, who descends from pioneering salt makers, continues to preserve the tradition as she works with the Samampa, a group of salt makers and fishermen in Botolan, Zambales.
9 na taong gulang po ako, nagluluto po yung lola at lola ko, kasamang nanay ko, kasama po ako dyan, nakikigulo-gulo, hanggang natuto na rin po akong nagluto ng asin. Pag wala na po siyang asin, nakuha na po natin lahat.
Lalagyan uli ng tubig.
Sumasama po ako, naghahakot po ako ng lupa, lalaro din po paminsan-minsan, kasi po, paghapon gusto ko po nandito ako kasi po marami pong bago na nagpupunta rito, nagbebenta ng mga kakanin. Pinapalitan po namin ng asin. Isang gatang na asin, tapos isang putong malaki. Kaya pagbating po ng hapon, talaga nandito na po ako. Kasi inaabang ko yung pagkain. Matakaw po kasi ako 5 po ang anak ko. Nakapaaral po ako kahit papaano. Yung pong bunso ko, malaking pong tulong sa akin yung pag-aasin.
Like Nanay Editha, Nanay Helen is a generational salt maker. She learned to harvest it from her mother in 1968.
Ano yun, yung mga dalagita pa ako, mami. Talagang nagluluto talaga kami. Hanggang sa nagkaroon na po ng pamilya, ito na rin po yung namin ng mag-asawa. Kami na rin po yung nagluto po dito. Kahit po may trabaho yung asawa ko, andito pa rin po ako sa panayunan. Hanggang ngayon po, kahit wala na siya, talagang hanggang kaya ko po, magluluto ako. Ganun po.
The long and arduous process of making asin Tibuok starts with lining the tatabagan or the V-shaped contraption with ashes. Once the tide reaches the mangrove, the seawater-infused mud is tediously gathered by the asinderos in the tatabagan. After filling it with more mud, more fresh water from the mangroves is poured to filter out the precious salt water that slowly drips into the pahig. Asinderos then cook the salt water the whole day to produce a pure, fine sea salt full of minerals.
Magkakaroon po yan ng asin sa gitna. Pag nagkaroon na po siya ng asin, may tubig po siya ng mga kaunti lang. Pakaibabaw na po yung asin. Ahanguin na po namin siya, ma'am.
While that's being made, they start weaving the buyo or sisidlan, a tradition that conveniently answers today's issues with the overuse of plastic packaging.
Magpapawid ako, gagawa ako ng pawid hanggang 7 piraso yan, ma'am. Ang haba, halos isang kawayan. Ito at saka yun, ang punong yun. 2 araw yan, ma'am, gawin. Pagkatapos yun, iatip na, ma'am. Pag nahango na yun, ilagay na sa tiklis. O, ilagay na po dito sa may init yung asin.
Nakita nyo naman po kung paano namin ginawa. Napakahirap po talaga. Talagang pagod po. Pawis po talaga. Nasa tao nga po yan. Pero napakalaki pong tulong.
Malaking tulong po kasi ang una-una rin po nating pangangailangan asin eh, ma'am. Hindi ka naman makaluto ng pagkain mo kung walang asin. Hindi naman pwede yung pati silang at tuyo.
At present, the second-generation descendants of the original 25 families continue to work with Philip Camara, Nicholas Camara's great-great-grandson, and his wife, Ching.
We had this piece of property that we bought from Philip's aunt, and we decided to build a beach house, right? So we built this house. And then I got to know the community around. I found out because they sent me as a gift packaged salt. So I said, wow, this is so nice, right? Since I was attached to the organic market in Makati, so I'll order salt from you, and then if you can package it that way. And then, so I would order a lot of salt, and then they produced it, and then I would sell it in Manila, so it became very popular.
With orders coming in, aging salt makers like Nanay Dita needed all the help they could get. Luckily, some of them have children who are willing to learn about the family tradition.
Nagsimula po ako, tinuruan po ako ng nanay ko po kung paano po gumawa po ng lagayan ng asin. Tinitingnan ko din po kung paano po ang pagluluto po niya ng asin. Hanggang sa natutunan ko na rin po. Proud po ako kasi ito na po yung ng magulang ko sa amin.
There is so much promise in Asin Buyo, yet the tradition hangs by a thread as the salt makers are reaching their twilight years and there are less young people like me who are willing to continue the art, seeking opportunities elsewhere.
Sana nga po, yung mga kabataan, matuto rin po sana sila. Kasi po paunti-unti na lang po kami nagluluto ng asin ngayon. Bali, 4 na lang pong nagluluto ng asin. Kasi po sa kahirapan din po magluto, sumuko-suko po yung iba.
Ay, oo nga. Wala na kayo akong alam. Puro na kayo cellphone. Wala na kayong ano ba kako yan. Paggising nyo sa umaga, cellphone na. Sabi ko sa mga, doon sa apo ko rin, ma'am, talagang araw-araw yan, nakakarinig sila sa akin.
Hello! Asin is
Gagawa ko, ma'am, hanggang kaya ko. Pinapatigil na nga ako, ma'am, ng kuya ko eh. Sabi niya sa akin, wag ka nang magluto ng asin at mahirap, matanda ka na. Sabi niya sa akin, hindi ka ko, magluluto ako hanggang kaya ko. Kasi ano naman ang gawin ko sa bahay.
This could be one of the most unique salts we've found in the Philippines. Tultul is an organic, solid, cooked salt made in Barangay Heussaff. It is one of the community's long-standing traditions and one that entails a tedious process.
Ako nga pala si Cherald Padojenog alias Ninin. Ang edad ko, 63 years old. Na nagluluto ng tultul. Dito ako nakatira sa Barangay Heussaff. Asin yun na bilog. Yan ang tinatawag na tultul. Kasi nung maliit pa ako, sabi ng tatay ko, magluto tayo ng tultul. Kasi pag wala tayong ulam, yan lang diin-diin sa kanin, ulam na. Yung maalat din, pero parang ibang lasa niya, compare mo sa asin. Malinamnam yan kasi, may nyog yan nga na kahalo. Pinagmanahan ko yan, sir, sa lolo ko, sa tatay ko. Ngayon ako na. Tapos yung mga bata ko, yan ang ginagawa din. Nagtutulong.
Natuto po ako ito ng 14 years old. Kasi tradisyon daw ng magulang ng lolo ko. Kaya ginaya ni mama. Tapos, para sa kung sakaling di na siya makagawa, mayroon pong may mag-continue ng tradisyon ng tultul sa Heussaff.
Actually kami support lang and then gusto na ring matuto. So pero talagang si nanay talaga yung yung nag-start talaga at yung nakakaalam kung paano yung proseso.
Kasi noon nung 11 years old, yan ang ginagawa namin. Yung tultul, dati noon, pag may gumagawa, kahit yung mga tao doon sa bundok pumupunta, mayroon din, pag wala silang pera, bigyan kanilang saging, bigyan kanilang balinghoy, kamuting kahoy. Yan, para may palit lang para makaulam sila.
Si nanay ko, yung pag-process niya po sa paggawa ng tultul, gumigising niyan madaling araw.
Tapos magtipon-tipon ng mga kahoy ng dagat.
Nanay Nenen and her children begin the process of making tultul by selectively gathering dagsa, an assortment of driftwood from the beach. These have been soaked in salt water for long periods of time, which gives them their salinity. The gathered dagsa is then burned in large quantities. This step can take up to a week, depending on how much ash is generated from the driftwood.
Pag nakakuha na kami ng abo, ilagay naman namin sa kaing. Yan. Tapos, kunin naman yung dagat at saka ibuhos doon sa kahing.
Seawater is poured again on the kaing, and the strained water is collected in containers underneath it. The process is repeated several more times to develop a hyper-concentrated solution. She mixes gata or coconut milk with the strained water, and then pours it into a hornohan or cooking pan. Small amounts of the strained water from the kaing are continuously added. After several hours, all moisture from the solidified salt completely evaporates, resulting in brick-like lumps of salt or barreta that are then packaged and sold. While Nanay Nenen and her family take pride in their tradition, they once met hurdles that almost threatened their livelihood.
Nung pag roon ng oil spill, hindi kami gumagawa ng tultul. Ilang bisis kami na hindi kami kasi epektado yung mga dagsa sa baybay. Lahat marami. Wala kami may nagawa. Sir, siguro mga 7 years na hindi kami nakagawa ng tultul. Kasi pag dating ng oil spill na una, tapos yung power barge naman, pagdating naman ng COVID, natagal. Hindi kami gumagawa ng tultul. Pag minsan, yung mga anak ko, kahit sa tricycle lang, nag-extra drive para makakita ng pera.
Pag hindi nangalakal, ang lang kami sir, mangingisda lang kami. Mingwet lang po. Yan lang po. Tapos, mangsisid po ng pasayan. Yan po trabaho namin. Thank you po ako sir kasi siya naging mama ko. Proud ako sir kahit sa anong trabaho. Sa pera man or sa pagkain, hindi kami pinababayaan. Sa pag-alaga, sa pag-aruga.
Kahit ano lang sir ang ginagawa ko para lang mabuhay yung mga anak ko. Dito lang sa Guimaras, mo lang nang ginagawa namin. Yung sa iba, hindi ko alam kung bakit kung may pumapasok pa nga asin dito ba. Ewan ko lang sa kanya kung bakit kung ganun ba. Nasa ibang bansa pa sila gumagawa, ang dito sa atin hindi. Kasi sabi ko sa mga anak ko, turuan na kayo para malaman nyo kung paano ang pagproseso ng tultul. Di ba? Para pag matanda na ako, kayang-kaya nyo pag magawa ng tultul.
Actually, para ma-maintain po yung cultural namin na ganito yung tradisyon sa pagluto, para hindi ito mawala.
Patuloy ko yung ginagawa ko, sir. Kasi wala naman may ibang gumagawa ng tultul. Pasalamat ako kung mayroon na bumibili o kaya umuorder na marami, gagawa rin ako agad-agad. Pag na yung mga tultul namin na ginagawa, pag nandun na sa ibang bansa, okay na. Siyempre, happy ako.
Luckily, there is hope. On September 11, 2023, a priority bill seeking to revive the Philippine salt industry was approved on its final reading, which means it is only a signature away from becoming a law. While we have been seeing small wins for the salt-making industry, it can be expected that there will be more challenges along the way. Talk about our traditional salts, honor the artisans behind them, and support them in any way you can.